This time, Veronika does not decide to die. First part. Preamble. The story below will not be told with joy, nor will it have a date of what happened, since remembering those details would be a bitter memory full of much stabbing pain, similar to the suffering of Prometheus, when he stole the fire of Olympus in favor of humans, and due to this mythological sin, he was punished by Zeus, chained to a rock, to later an eagle devour his liver day after day, for the simple fact of this immortal titan wanting to improve the quality of human life, in his genesis. Something that I unfortunately want to highlight as an emotional psychological warning, is that the events that follow will be tattooed, like an indelible stain, not only in their neurons, dear friend or reader friend. That is to say, what you are about to read will be a story that will eat away at your psyche even when you are peacefully asleep, in the same way that, day after day, they tormented the mind of Veronika, the main character of this tragedy, which is full of lights of joy, decorated with sufferings. History. I remember that it was an ordinary morning, with the routine like morning breakfast, when the manager of the electrical appliance store where Veronika worked, knocked on the door of said employee's office. Veronika looked away from the computer so she could see who had touched. Realizing it was his boss, he responded immediately, shaking his head in approval to pass. Immediately his boss came in very calmly, with some gifts in his hands. Once inside the office, he greeted in a pleasant way and immediately said to his secretary, "Veronika, I have decided to give you the day off. You have worked a lot this month and, therefore, you deserve it." And he added, "Here you have a recognition plaque and inside this envelope there is an incentive, since you were chosen as the employee of the month, so enjoy it very much. From me, have a happy rest of the day." Veronika was surprised at such a wonderful start to the day and thanked her boss, who left her alone and left. For her part, Veronika, happy and relaxed, began to organize the office to go home and enjoy an unexpected day of rest. On the way home, she entered a commercial establishment, which was a few blocks from where she lived, where she bought some things to prepare a good lunch for her husband, all thought as a noon surprise. Arriving home at around 10:15 on that beautiful morning, she found it strange to see her husband's car in the garage of the house. Since that day, shortly before they both left for their respective jobs, he had told her that he was going to get home after 1 p.m. and not at noon, as he used to arrive, for reasons of a supposed meeting in his office, where he worked. Veronika gave no more mind to the vehicle. She imagined that perhaps the meeting had been cancelled and her husband was resting at home since the front door was closed, so, then, she took out her key and as usual, quietly opened the door with the thought of surprising her husband while he slept, with a good hug and a nice kiss, since I saw him sleeping like a dormouse. Suddenly when she entered the house, she heard some strange sounds in her room, which, according to her, were from an adult channel on television, but when she got to her room, she was the one surprised. Her husband Mauricio was not alone in the room. A woman that Veronika had never seen was having intimacy with him, in his own home and on the bed, which before was only the two of them. When visualizing this unforeseen and heartbreaking event, Veronika not only dropped the shopping bags and other objects that she had in her hands, but also her life and her soul. In that instant, her world collapsed, her mind clouded, and all her dreams were shattered. For her at that precise moment, the little butterflies that she had previously felt in her stomach had turned into annoying worms. What, for her, was previously a universe of stars, with the blue sky, in which the moon and the sun shone, with a beautiful rainbow on the horizon, had been stained with grey clouds of betrayal, in that dark and unfortunate, horror scene. His only reaction was to cover his mouth with his hands, while his gaze reflected the real image of human torture. When he was caught on the spot, Mauricio went to Veronika, in a hurry trying to tell her that what she had seen was an illusion, that nothing was true. While that woman, whom he had brought home, without saying a word, quickly dressed and fled the room, similar to a shooting star, looking for the nearest exit from that embarrassing and unexpected scenario. For her part, Veronika said nothing. But immediately on his face, the silent language of his sorrow appeared, the quiet voice of his sadness, the visible sign that he loved. Those warm tears emanated from his sad eyes, like the waters of the Nile River in the summer months. The wet expression of his sorrow, as a meaning of when love hurts. She also felt a pain in her heart, which did not allow her to breathe well. The only words that came out of his lips were, "Go right now and never come back." This being an order that Mauricio, who could not calm her down, seeing himself between a rock and a hard place, heeded and left, with taciturn language. Veronika, very hurt and nervous, full of impotence, emptied the closet of that shameless infidel, ripping her belongings from the closet with great anger and lack of control, while the hangers flew from here to there, while her crying was soaking all the clothes, to then throw them out of the house, behind Mauricio, moments before he entered the vehicle, to flee from it, a disaster that he himself caused without measuring the consequences. The sad Veronika, after this, closed the door of the house with a loud bang and immediately collapsed. This time her cries were expressed deliberately and openly. Those moans, products of their terrible pain, were perhaps heard by their closest neighbors, since, as always said residents, they always have their ears very open to the affairs of others. Mauricio took his rags from the floor and, even knowing what he had done, asked from the other side of the door, "Are you okay, Veronika?" This being the most cynic question that has ever been heard in life. Veronika did not answer him. And Mauricio, he left, like a random dog, with his tail between his legs, taking with him all the guilt of a condemned man, who murdered in life, the soul and good feelings of the only woman who truly loved him. As time went by, Veronika, already living alone, tried to forget that day and that horrible event. But sadly, everything she did both, inside and outside the home, reminded her of that great day, in which part of her died. Since then, no one has seen him smile, or dress in brightly colored clothes, as he used to. The one who was a woman, sociable, accommodating and fun, no longer went out to share with anyone, nor greeted anyone. His routine was from work to home. Her life represented the female version of the Lone Ranger. While at home, most of the time Veronika spent it, inside the bathroom, crying without consolation, stuck in the jacuzzi, with a glass of wine in her right hand, and Enda left a photo of her wedding, where she and the heartbreaker of Mauricio. In the photo he was holding, they were both smiling. Resulting now that smile of the portrait, a shameless mockery at his gaze. That memory in his left hand, was a pure image of the perfect. Where they were both seen with great joy, similar to the best romantic scene, ever seen in a fairy tale couple. But outside of that portrait the reality was different. Already in the real world, both the photograph and it were destroyed. That is to say, the photo had the glass broken and Veronika had all her heart. Besides, Mauricio was no longer accepted, as an important part of that memory. Since his actions caused her to remove him from both her soul and her heart, as if it were the most malignant cancer in the world. Veronika decided to stay alone, after having received the most vile thrust from him, who before was her greatest treasure, but who unfortunately turned out to be her worst executioner. Without any omen of life, this unfortunate woman who only knew how to give love, tasted something worse than absinthe. That is, he tested the bitrix of human nature, which is called felony. Anyone who has heard the expression "you too Brutus," or perhaps read about Judas Iscariot and the 30 silver coins, will know what I mean by the above. The unfortunate Veronika, more than anything, regretted having abandoned all her friendships, as a result of her marriage and her change of city, when she married Mauricio. She missed the good relationship she had with her parents before getting married, and it hurt her soul to have given her youth and virginity to a man who turned out to be unfaithful to her, when she was most in love, who ended up breaking her heart, for no apparent reason. Many thoughts passed through his mind, searching in the depths of his imagination, possible causes of what had happened. But recognizing that she always treated Mauricio in a very attentive, affectionate, respectful way, and in privacy she was as ardent as an imp from Greek mythology, being also quite hard-working, she did not understand the reason for that disgrace. In the same way, he asked himself many questions, which resulted in true mental martyrdom, such as how many times had he taken this or another woman home while she was working. But after so many mental questions, he decided to stop imagining those and other bad thoughts, so as not to contaminate himself by aggravating his own pain, with the poison of his cyclical imaginations. On a rainy Friday, a month after so much loneliness and emotional martyrdom, Veronika felt better. He packed everything up and decided to move out. She lived in a very distinguished house, in the town of South Austin, in the city of Chicago, USA. Now his destiny was to go live in a warmer place and away from that house that only reminded him of the cause of his misfortune. His destination was Portugal, southern European country on the Iberian Peninsula, bordering Spain, surrounded by beautiful beaches, where a new life was promised to start. Her best friend lived there, who found out about her tragedy and provided her with the low-cost and very comfortable apartment. He also told her that he already had a job available for her, which Veronika only had to accept. The girl who was talked about so much in this novel, was working as a secretary in an appliance sales company in Chicago, and now in Portugal she was going to be the assistant to her friend Daphne, in a better job. In other words, Veronika's friend was the manager of one of the most distinguished jewelers in Portugal. An unplanned day, and without much to pack, Veronika left for Portugal without saying goodbye to anyone. Traveling to his new destination, seeking new airs of life, his soul felt, as it was liberating itself from that heavy and salubrious, indelible memory. During the entire flight to Portugal, he spent it looking out the window of the plane, as if wanting to see what the future held, through the window, on that infinite horizon. Next, very moving things happened. The meeting between Veronika and her friend Daphne was very pleasant, mixed with certain melancholic emotions. When they saw each other from afar at the airport, they both smiled, but as they got closer, they began to sob. Ending the meeting with an extremely moving embrace, full of repentance, similar to the reunion of the father and his wayward son, which the Bible recounts, in the parable of the prodigal son, in the book of Luke, chapter 15 verse 20. Daphne cried for the joy she felt at seeing her best friend after many years, and Veronika for the same reason, plus the pain she brought, including the inner guilt, for having forgotten that good friend when she was married. Time passed. The storm in Veronika's life subsided, peace of mind began to sprout its roots, and the rays of light, in the aura of her face, began to come out, little by little. The young Veronika began to sprout, now being her best version, living in another country, also becoming a very successful woman in her work. Veronika was no longer the crying girl from before. From time to time he smiled, and although not so frequently, but he also began to interact with some people at work. A sample of emotional recovery, very healthy for her. The only thing that still did not overcome, was to stop wearing opaque clothes, the color of mourning. Whenever he went to work or for some social activity, he wore black or gray. It was difficult for her to make that radical change, keeping in mind those memories that marked her life. Apart from her day-to-day social gatherings, work and home, there was something that Veronika really liked and enjoyed doing, which later became her weekend routine. And it was going for a walk in the afternoon to the Faro District beach, a place that made her feel like Alice in Wonderland. She felt so free there, and although still incomplete, her mind relaxed quite a bit every time she walked and played with her pet, a little dog called Joy, on the shores of the waves. Going to the beach every afternoon on weekends was the recipe for the ailments that still surfaced in Veronika's psyche. Enjoying the Faro District beach became his life habit. There she felt renewed, the fresh breeze, the blue of the sea, and the whole environment gave Veronika the feeling that there was a light at the end of the tunnel during her walk through this world, and that despite all the inevitable evils that ensue, life is beautiful. One of those days that are never forgotten, he decided to go for a walk as usual with his pet, a white dog, which he named Allegoria. In order to do so, every time she saw him or called him, improve his attitude towards life, then allowing the idea of the emotional state he should have to come to his mind. Apparently that day had been chosen by God for his life story to take a turn towards a better path. And it is that a very elegant and athletic man, he was also walking his dog. The same dog that went crazy when he saw Veronika's dog. Apparently this dog was horny and went after the dog Allegoria, causing Paulo, who was called that way, to find himself where Veronika was, running desperately in search of his dog. Arriving right in front of Veronika, he took it upon himself to reassure his dog and immediately apologized for his action. Breathing somewhat agitated, shortness of breath, from having run after his pet, he could kindly only say, "Excuse me, miss. My dog was the culprit that I came here to interrupt his walk." And taking a little air he added, although with sincerity, looking at it closely and with all the respect you deserve, "Perhaps I have lied to you by telling you the above. Since according to what my eyes see, I think that even without my beloved dog, I would have caused this unexpected encounter. I think that, when crossing by his side, I would have managed it, to find the best excuse to approach, and greet him. And again excuse me miss, but I am so attracted to you, as well as Narcissus to your reflection. All thanks to the beautiful figure and beauty that you have." Veronika felt something very strange inside her, for her ears were the words of a daring one of those who go around flattering women for how they look according to their exterior. But for his self-esteem it was something like that, like medicinal words to his ailments. She blushed a little and told the gentleman, who was about 25 years old, "Thank you for the compliment, dear stranger." Then she discreetly took her pet Joy off the ground and continued on her way serenely, but with the image of that man in her mind. It is worth saying that in the desires of the moment in Veronika's heart the desire to continue that walk with that man, that God put on her path, surfaced. But her pride as a woman, including the unforeseen situation of that meeting, were not the right ones. "Paulo, I didn't know what to do." He was only perplexed, watching how the breeze from the coast moved the hair of that beautiful woman, who had just met. His eyes did not blink observing those beautiful silhouettes on Veronika's body. For truly, she was a very attractive girl from head to toe. I have to say that Veronika really attracted Paulo a lot. In other words, she was so captivating to him, as according to scientists, the force of gravity draws bodies towards its center. The desire to conquer her was similar to the obsession that the squirrel Scrat had, in the movie Ice Age, to possess the acorn. But in this context, the attraction I felt, as you can imagine, was for a very different purpose. All this sensation passed through Paulo's mind and nervous system, while Veronika slowly walked away, in that beautiful sunset on the shore of the beach. At the head of Paulo came a very popular phrase, promoted by a famous fighter from his childhood called John Cena, who always wore a sweater that read, "Never give up," translated into Spanish, "Never give up," which motivated him a lot, and he immediately started on his way to where Veronika was, trying to take advantage of the occasion, or rather try to conquer that beautiful angel that life put in front of him. Like a baby that emerges in this world and going after its mother's womb, it tries to take its first sip of milk, thus ending its whining, reaching the greatest earthly satisfaction, which we humans call success. He approached Veronika and, apologizing for the third time, this time he said, "May I walk with you?" And added, "I know that for you I am a stranger, but I want to stop being one." Listening to this polite way, and at the same time so brave, by way of supplication, to start an evening talk with a stranger, Veronika ended up feeling a strange sensation inside, something like a sudden chill. That is, when she noticed how this man, who, just by seeing him, revived in her those dead butterflies in her womb, just as Pepe Le Pew fell in love, Apollo fell into her invisible nets, without her making the slightest gesture of own it. It was something that greatly surprised him, and at the same time fueled more the curiosity of allowing him to accompany her on that walk, under the twilight light. With passive and soft words he said to his arrow pursuer, "Okay, I accept your apologies, come and walk with me." For Apollo this was the best answer which he had ever heard in his life. It is worth saying that not even the freedom given to a jailer, after years in prison, would be as pleasant as what Apollo felt when he received approval to walk with this girl, who made his heart beat in a special way, in this modest walk that resulted in an encounter of love at first sight. Exhausted from walking so much and secretly looking at each other and without anyone saying a word, they arrived at a beautiful place, quite quiet and somewhat removed from the other individuals who inhabited that coast. They sat on the sand and, looking at each other's faces, in that wonderful sunset, they decided that it was time to talk. They both proceeded to introduce themselves, Paolo being the first, thus achieving, each one to know about the other, the most elementary thing that happens in a first meeting, that is, everything basic and superficial. Paolo spoke like a parakeet, while Veronika listened discreetly and spoke little, making use of a teaching that his grandmother transmitted to him during his childhood. Veronika's grandmother once told her, "Remember, dear granddaughter, that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and that means that we must always hear more than we must speak." Although Paolo could see how interested she was to know more and more about Veronika, she only answered what was necessary and half smiled, and she did not do it out of hypocrisy, but because she knew that she was in the process of sentimental recovery. Understand, this was the first time that she had conversed with a man openly since her marital eclipse happened. Interrogations were not lacking, just as it always happens when two people who are attracted to each other, usually carry out in their first meeting. Veronika answered everything with humility, keeping extreme care not to give the smallest detail about her bitter past in Chicago, but she was extremely sincere, with all the other details, to the things that were asked of her. Paolo also answered everything that was asked, as if he wanted to be an open book for Veronika in that afternoon conversation. For Veronika, that short walk, including all the time talking sitting on the sand, meant the most beautiful day of all she had had on the Faro District beach, since this time, she was not alone. That is to say, now she was meeting a person who attracted her a lot, even without feeling herself ready for a romance. To be continued.